I was sitting at my own Christmas Eve table with a silver locket in my pocket and a folder waiting in the next room. The woman across from me had no idea she'd already lost 3 weeks before she ever opened her mouth to say so. She thought tonight was going to end with a family meeting about my finances. She had no idea what I'd actually sold my company for 9 years ago. She had no idea my late wife had spent her final year making absolutely sure a moment exactly like this one would never actually work. My name is Neil Hartman. I'm 63 years old, and for 9 years I've lived quieter than almost anyone who knew what I used to do for a living would expect. In about 20 minutes, my future daughter-in-law was going to stand up after dinner and try to take control of my life. She had no idea what was already sitting in the next room, waiting for her. Welcome to my channel. Get settled, because this one is going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're going to love it here. My name is Neil Hartman. I'm 63 years old, and I've lived in Hartford, Connecticut for almost my whole adult life, in the same modest house I bought 30 years ago with my wife Carol. 9 years back, I sold a software company I'd spent 2 decades building. Most people who knew me only as the quiet guy who used to write code never learned what that sale was actually worth, because I never told them. I drive a 12-year-old truck. I still do my own yard work. Carol used to say I was too quiet for my own good about money, and she wasn't wrong. Carol died 18 months ago, after a long illness, pancreatic, slow in the way those things are sometimes slow, cruel in exactly the way you'd expect. I want to tell you something about her illness, because it matters later. Carol was sharp, genuinely, fully sharp, almost until the very end. She managed her own medications from a spreadsheet she kept on her phone. She ran the household budget from her hospital bed, catching a billing error in our home insurance 3 weeks before she died. She corrected my grammar in a text message 4 days before she passed. A small dry joke about my use of less instead of fewer that made the hospice nurse laugh. Whatever took her body, it never once touched her mind. I need you to hold on to that detail, because someone in this story was about to bet against it. Our son Bradley is 33, an engineer at an aerospace firm outside the city, steady and a little conflict-averse the way only sons sometimes are. He got engaged a little over a year ago to a woman named Vanessa Cole, 31, who works in wealth management downtown. Vanessa is sharp in her own way, polished, always dressed like she's about to walk into a client meeting even at a Sunday dinner. She calls me Neil instead of Dad, which never bothered me particularly. She has a habit of asking questions about the estate that always seem to arrive dressed up as concern. I want to be fair to her here, because it would be easy not to be. For the first several months after Carol died, Vanessa seemed genuinely helpful. Bringing groceries, checking in on Sunday afternoons, sitting with me once through an entire evening when the house felt too quiet to be in alone. That's the kind of thing a good daughter-in-law does, and I noticed it, and I was grateful for it. Somewhere along the way, though, checking in started sounding less like concern and more like an audit. She'd ask what bank I used, casually, over coffee. She'd ask, lightly, whether I had a will updated, and whether Bradley was named on anything. She'd ask if I ever got confused about dates or appointments, framed as a joke. The kind of joke you laugh along with once and then start noticing isn't really a joke at all, the second or third time it comes up. What Vanessa didn't know, what almost nobody in the family knew, including Bradley, was what my company actually sold for 9 years ago. Or that Carol, in her last year, had quietly done something about the exact kind of situation she must have sensed was coming. She never accused Vanessa of anything directly, not once, not even to me in private. Carol wasn't like that, she observed. She prepared carefully, the way she prepared everything in her life, from Sunday dinners to her own funeral arrangements, and she left instructions in case I ever needed them. There's a sealed letter Carol left me. I've known about it since the week she died, sitting in a manila envelope in my attorney's fireproof filing cabinet, my name written on the front in her handwriting. My attorney has it, along with some other paperwork. I was told, very specifically, only to open it if the family ever questioned whether I could still manage my own affairs. For 18 months, I never had a reason to open it. I carry a small silver locket of hers in my pocket most days, the one with our wedding photo folded inside. The one she wore every day of our marriage, except the last few weeks, when it grew too heavy for her to keep around her neck. I didn't know, at the start of that Christmas, how soon I'd need everything else Carol had left behind too. My daughter Michelle called me on a Tuesday evening in early December, her voice tight in a way I don't hear from her often. Michelle is 36, married to a good man named Danny, lives 20 minutes away with their 2 kids. She doesn't rattle easily. She's the one who handled Carol's funeral arrangements almost single-handedly, while I could barely put a sentence together. "Dad," she said, "I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it gently." "Just say it," I told her, setting down the dish towel in my hand. She'd been at a lunch that afternoon with Vanessa and a mutual family friend, Carol's old bridge partner Eleanor. Vanessa had said it casually, like she was discussing the weather. She'd been stirring sugar into her coffee the whole time she said it. She'd been worried about Dad's memory lately, she'd told them, and it might be time to look into someone helping him manage his finances. Michelle said she'd pushed back immediately. She'd asked what on earth Vanessa was talking about. I hadn't shown a single sign of anything like that, not once, not ever, in all the years Michelle had known me. Vanessa had backed off in the moment, smiled, said maybe she was overthinking it. But the sentence had already been said, in front of a witness. Delivered with the ease of someone who'd said it before and was watching to see how it landed. I sat with that for a long moment before I answered Michelle, staring out my kitchen window at the yard I still mow myself. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "I'll handle it." "Dad, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "I just need to think for a minute. This isn't the first small thing I've noticed, if I'm honest with you." I called Vanessa that same evening, a little after 8. I kept my voice even, the way I've kept my voice even in every difficult conversation I've ever had. Laying off half my engineering team during a rough quarter. Sitting across from Carol's oncologist the day the numbers stopped being good. "Michelle mentioned a conversation at lunch," I said. "About my memory." There was a pause on the line, calculating rather than confused, the kind of pause a person takes when they're choosing which version of a lie to tell. "Neil," Vanessa said, "I think we should all just be honest with each other. You're 63. Things happen at a certain age. Nobody's blaming you for it." "What things have happened?" Another pause, longer this time. "You forgot Bradley's birthday dinner reservation last month. You've mentioned Carol in the present tense twice that I've noticed. I moved the reservation a day because the restaurant called and cancelled our original time," I said. "Bradley knows that, because he's the one I called to tell, that same afternoon. And grief doesn't always use the correct tense, Vanessa. That's not the same thing as forgetting she's gone. I buried a wife. I haven't lost my mind. Neil." Her voice shifted, the practiced calm of someone who's rehearsed this exact moment. "He can't be trusted with money anymore. It's time someone else took control." I want you to sit with that sentence for a second, because I did. Not the accusation itself. I'd half expected something like it was coming, the way you expect a storm once you've watched the sky long enough. Just the ease of it. Like she'd said it before, to someone else, and was getting comfortable with how it sounded out loud. "Is that what you've been telling people?" I said, keeping my voice as flat and level as I could manage. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Neil. I'm trying to help this family before something happens that none of us can undo. We'll talk at Christmas," I said, and hung up before she could answer, my thumb finding the end call button with a steadiness that surprised even me. I didn't call back that night, or text an angry follow-up, or drive over to confront her in person. I want to be honest about something. It would make a better story if I'd lost my temper right there in my kitchen, thrown my phone against the wall, done something a man in a movie does. I didn't. I stood at my counter for a long while, the same counter Carol used to roll out pie crust on every December. I let the quiet settle over me the way it always has when something serious needs handling rather than reacting to. I was doing what I've done in every serious negotiation of my professional life when someone tries to move faster than the facts allow. I was getting quiet, and I was starting to look. I called Michelle back the next morning, coffee in hand, standing at the same window I'd stared out of the night before. I asked her, gently, whether this was the first time she'd heard anything like this from Vanessa. She hesitated before answering, a long pause over the line, which told me most of what I needed to know before she said a single word. "There was something a few weeks ago, too," Michelle said. "At Frank's house, over Thanksgiving. Vanessa pulled me aside in the kitchen, while I was washing dishes, and asked if I'd noticed you repeating yourself, forgetting things, losing your train of thought mid-sentence. I said no, because you hadn't, not once, not that I'd seen. I told her that pretty firmly. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured she was just being cautious. People get that way after watching a parent go through what we went through with Mom. Always looking for warning signs, even where there aren't any." The first layer: this wasn't a single slip at a lunch table. It was a pattern, at least 6 weeks old by the time Michelle told me about the lunch conversation, stretching back to Thanksgiving. Each mention was small enough on its own to dismiss. Each one was part of something larger, though, when you finally laid them side by side on a kitchen table, like puzzle pieces nobody had bothered to connect until now. I found myself doing exactly that at my own table that evening. I spread 6 weeks of small comments across the surface. I sorted them by date, by who'd heard them, by how casually each one had been dropped into an otherwise ordinary conversation. By the time I was done, they'd stopped looking like scattered pieces and started looking like something that finally had a shape. The second layer came from my own bank. I called my longtime contact there, a relationship manager named Corinne Baptiste. She'd handled my accounts since before the company's sale. She'd known Carol well enough to attend her funeral, standing near the back of the church with a handkerchief she never quite got the chance to use. I called under the pretense of reviewing my quarterly statement, something I do every few months anyway, so the call wouldn't seem unusual to anyone listening in on either end. Near the end of our conversation, almost as an aside, Corinne mentioned that a family member had called the branch a few weeks earlier. They'd asked general questions about the process for adding a co-signer or power of attorney to an account, in case of a health situation. Corinne hadn't given out any information. My accounts are protected, and she's known me long enough to have found the call out on its own. But she noted it in the file, and when I asked gently if she remembered the caller's name, it matched exactly who I expected. "Vanessa Cole," I repeated back to her. "That's the name on the message slip," Corinne said. "I wasn't going to mention it unprompted, Neil, but since you called today asking, I thought you should know. Is everything all right?" "It will be," I told her, and meant it more than she could have known from 4 words alone. If you've ever built something for 30 years, only to have someone assume you're no longer capable of managing it, without ever once asking you directly, I want you to sit with this for a moment. That assumption becomes its own kind of theft, long before any paperwork ever changes hands, long before a single account is touched. It doesn't need a signature to start taking something from you. It just needs enough people willing to repeat it at enough dinner tables until it starts sounding true. Until the story becomes more real to people than the man standing right in front of them. The third layer was the one that actually took the calm out of my voice for the first time in this whole thing. Michelle did some careful asking of her own over the following days, calling cousins and old family friends under the guise of holiday planning. She learned from a cousin that Vanessa had also had an informal conversation with an elder law attorney at a mutual friend's dinner party in early November. It wasn't yet a consultation, just a conversation, over appetizers, the kind of thing that sounds harmless until you learn exactly what was actually asked. Not asked hypothetically, in the abstract, the way you might ask about a distant hypothetical relative. Asked about me, by name, specifically, according to the cousin who'd been standing right there refilling her wine glass when it happened. She'd been close enough to hear every word of it clearly. "Dad," Michelle said, her voice shaking a little now. I think this is more organized than any of us realized. This isn't just Vanessa being anxious about you. This is a plan, and I don't think Bradley even fully understands how far along it already is. I don't know if he'd let himself see it even if I sat him down and told him plainly, word for word, everything I just told you. I told her I agreed. I didn't tell her yet what I intended to do about it, because I hadn't fully decided. Not that afternoon, sitting alone in my kitchen with the phone still warm against my ear. Carol's old apron still hung on its hook by the stove, right where it's hung for 18 months, undisturbed, exactly where she left it. I called my attorney, a man named Gerald Kwan who'd handled both the company's sale and Carol's estate planning for over a decade. He'd sat with me in far harder rooms than this one would turn out to be. I mostly wanted to ask him one question. What would it actually take, legally, for someone to succeed in a guardianship or power of attorney claim against a person who was fully, demonstrably competent? Documentation, Gerald told me, without hesitation, like he'd answered this exact question 100 times before for 100 other frightened families sitting in that same chair across from him. A judge wants to see evidence either way. If you have it, and she doesn't, this ends quickly, often in a single hearing. If either side has it, it can drag on for months and get ugly regardless of what's actually true. That ugliness alone can be its own kind of punishment for the person telling the truth, win or lose in the end. If you've been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. It costs you nothing and it means everything to us. Hit the like button while you're at it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. I want you to picture what I was looking at 3 weeks before Christmas. A whispering campaign at least 6 weeks old, already reaching a bank contact and an elder law attorney, spreading quietly through a family that trusted her. A future daughter-in-law who had no idea what my company actually sold for, or what my late wife had quietly prepared for exactly this moment, years before it ever arrived. And a son caught somewhere in the middle, coached by a woman he loved, without any way of knowing yet how far she'd already gone behind his back. I drove to Gerald's office the week after that call. I asked him to pull the file Carol had set up 18 months earlier, the notarized competency evaluation and the sealed letter. I hadn't opened either one in all that time. I'd never had a reason to, and some part of me had hoped I never would. Carol had been specific, almost stern about it in the note she'd left with Gerald, only if the family ever questioned my capacity, and not a day sooner. That threshold had now, unmistakably, been crossed. I sat in Gerald's waiting room feeling strangely like I was about to open a door Carol had built for me from the other side of it. She'd built it years before either of us knew I'd need it. The competency evaluation was straightforward, 12 pages, performed by Dr. Patricia Osei, Carol's own longtime physician, dated 14 months before Carol died. That meant Carol had arranged this while she herself was still fighting for every good day she had left, still managing her own medications, still correcting my grammar. She still found, somehow, the presence of mind to think 2 steps ahead for me. Full cognitive workup, clean results across every measure, notarized and filed with Gerald's office specifically so it would exist on record before anyone ever had a reason to question it. Carol hadn't done this because she suspected me of anything. She'd done it, I understood now, sitting in that quiet office, because she suspected someone else eventually might. She wasn't going to leave me to fight that fight without a single piece of paper on my side, not after everything else she'd already had to fight alone. The letter was harder. I read it alone, in Gerald's conference room, with the door closed and the blinds drawn. The fluorescent light hummed faintly overhead, the way it always seemed to in that building. My hands weren't quite steady on the envelope, despite everything I'd just told Corinne about being fine. Carol had written it 11 months before she died, in the small, precise handwriting I'd have recognized anywhere, the same handwriting from 30 years of grocery lists and birthday cards. In it, she said plainly that she'd watched Vanessa closely over the 2 years she'd known her, ever since Bradley first brought her home for a Sunday dinner. She believed Vanessa genuinely loved Bradley. But she'd also noticed a pattern. Vanessa asked pointed questions about money and estate planning far earlier, and far more often, than seemed ordinary for someone just joining a family. She described 3 specific instances, each one dated in the margin the way Carol dated everything. A Thanksgiving conversation about how these things usually get divided. A birthday dinner where Vanessa had asked, out of nowhere, whether Neil had a living will. A quiet comment to Bradley, once overheard, about how some families just aren't organized enough. Carol didn't accuse her of anything criminal, or even anything certain. She simply wrote, "If you're reading this because someone has questioned your mind, Neil, know that I never did. Not for one day, not for 1 hour of the 2 years I watched you manage everything this family needed. Whoever raised the question is telling you something true about themselves, not about you." I sat with that letter a long while before I could fold it back into its envelope. The study around me was perfectly quiet, except for the sound of my own breathing. Somewhere down the hall, Gerald's assistant answered a phone that felt, in that moment, like it belonged to a different, more ordinary world than the one I was sitting in. There was something else in Gerald's file I hadn't expected. Gerald mentioned, almost in passing, that the elder law attorney Vanessa had informally spoken with at that dinner party happened to be a former associate of his. Someone from years back, he said, someone he hadn't thought about in a long while. Word travels in small professional circles, smaller than most people realize. The associate had mentioned the conversation to Gerald weeks earlier, before I'd even known to ask. It had simply struck him as an unusual thing to be asked about a man he knew, secondhand, was by every account still sharp as ever. "I should have called you sooner," Gerald said, looking almost embarrassed about it, folding his hands on the desk between us. "I didn't realize it was connected to anything real. I figured it was idle curiosity, a hypothetical someone was chewing over at a party." I told him he had nothing to apologize for. None of us had the full picture yet, not even Carol, not entirely. She'd prepared for a possibility, not a certainty, and she'd been right anyway, the way she usually was about people. I called Dr. Osei myself the following week, and told her plainly what was happening. I asked if she'd be willing to attend Christmas Eve dinner as a family friend, which she genuinely was, warmly so, ever since Carol's illness. She'd sat with both of us through some of the hardest afternoons of that final year, holding Carol's hand through more than one bad appointment. I let her know I might need her there in a professional capacity as well, briefly, if the evening required it. She agreed without a moment's hesitation. She told me, quietly, that she'd wondered when something like this might surface. She noticed something in Vanessa's demeanor at Carol's memorial, a coolness she noted at the time and never quite forgotten. That comment stuck with me for the rest of that call. I kept coming to every family gathering through those weeks, same as always, same easy smile at the door. I kept my voice level when Vanessa asked, once more, lightly, whether I'd remembered to update my will. It was at a casual Sunday dinner she'd volunteered to help me cook, standing at my own stove in an apron that used to be Carol's. I told her I had everything handled. That was, in every sense, true, though not in the sense she took it. I watched her nod, satisfied, apparently believing she'd planted one more small seed of doubt, unaware of how far past that seed I'd already moved. The dramatic irony cut deep during those weeks. Bradley called me twice, sounding uncertain, clearly caught between his fiancée and a father he loved, his voice smaller both times than I was used to hearing from him. He asked questions that were obviously Vanessa's questions, wearing his voice, whether I'd thought about simplifying things financially, whether I'd consider letting someone else help with the day-to-day. I told him I'd thought about it plenty, and that I'd let him know when I'd made any decisions. I meant that more literally than he understood. I could hear, underneath his questions, a son who didn't fully believe what he was being asked to carry to me. Some part of me ached for him even then. Vanessa, for her part, mentioned to Michelle over a different phone call, breezily. She was planning to bring up a family conversation about Dad's situation, right after Christmas Eve dinner. Everyone would be together, she reasoned out loud. They'd be in a good enough mood from the food and the wine to be receptive to hard news, delivered gently. It was the way she'd apparently rehearsed saying it, more than once. Michelle relayed this to me, appalled. She asked if I wanted her to say something to Vanessa beforehand, to head it off before it could happen in front of the whole family. I told her that was fine. I told her, in fact, that I was glad to know exactly when. I asked her to say nothing at all, and to let the evening unfold exactly the way Vanessa had planned it, down to the last detail. If you've stayed with me this far, you already know quiet isn't the same as unaware. It's just a choice about when to speak, and I'd been making that choice, deliberately, every single day, for 3 long weeks leading up to that dinner. Christmas Eve dinner went the way it always has at my house. There was too much food, the way there always is. Frank told the same story about the ice storm of '98 that gets a little more dramatic every year. The same string lights Carol used to hang along the mantel every December were still hung the same way I'd watched her do it for 30 years. Same slightly crooked pattern she never once fixed. Bradley was quieter than usual, pushing food around his plate more than eating it. Vanessa was attentive all evening, in a way that felt, now, like a woman counting down a clock only she could see. She refilled wine glasses before anyone asked, complimented the tree twice, glanced at her watch when she thought no one was looking. Dr. Osei sat near the end of the table, exactly where I'd asked her to when I called to confirm the seating that morning. She was dressed simply, warmly, like the family friend she genuinely was. She caught my eye once, briefly, when I set my napkin down beside my plate. The folder was already sitting on the side table in the study, exactly where I'd left it that afternoon after one final read-through of every page. The locket sat in my coat pocket instead of my pants for the first time in months, close enough to reach without thinking. That was exactly how I'd wanted it that night. As the plates were being cleared, Vanessa spoke up, exactly on schedule, setting down the dish she was holding with a little more ceremony than the moment strictly required. "Before everyone scatters," she said, "I think we should talk, as a family, about some things going forward. For Dad's sake." I stood up before Bradley or Michelle could respond, my chair scraping softly against the hardwood floor. "I agree," I said. "Let's talk." I walked to the study and came back with the folder, unhurried. It was the way you walk when you've rehearsed a moment enough times in your head that your body already knows exactly how to move through it. Your mind doesn't even have to guide it anymore. I set it on the table, the silver locket in my hand. I opened it in front of everyone, the way I'd pictured myself doing it every night for the past 3 weeks. 6 weeks ago, I said, Vanessa began telling people I have memory problems. She said this to Michelle at a lunch with Eleanor, 3 weeks in. She called my bank asking about power of attorney. She spoke to an elder law attorney about guardianship, by name, mine, at a dinner party in November. The room went silent the particular way a room goes silent when the wrong sentence lands in the right one. Frank set down his coffee cup without drinking from it, glancing between me and Vanessa like he was watching a tennis match he hadn't realized he'd walked into. Vanessa's face didn't move for a full second. It was the practiced stillness of someone recalculating in real time, running the numbers on how much I actually knew, and how much room she still had left to maneuver. "That's not, I was concerned, that's all this ever was, Neil," she said, her voice climbing half a register. Her eyes darted once toward Bradley for support that didn't come. "You told me, on the phone, 3 weeks ago, that I can't be trusted with money anymore," I said. "That it was time someone else took control. Those were your exact words, spoken plainly, without any hesitation at all. I remember them clearly, which is, I suppose, part of the point." I slid the first document across the table, Dr. Osei's competency evaluation, 14 months old, notarized, clean across every single measure the test could report. Dr. Osei confirmed it herself, quietly, from her seat, without being asked twice. Her voice was steady and clinical, in a way that seemed to land harder in that room than if she'd raised it. Then I slid Carol's letter across the table. I read one line of it aloud, the only line I needed to, my voice catching very slightly as I said her name. "Whoever raised the question is telling you something true about themselves, not about you." Bradley had gone pale, staring at the letter like he was seeing his mother's handwriting for the first time in 18 months, his jaw tight. Michelle was crying, quietly, the way she does when she's furious rather than sad, her hand pressed flat against the table like she needed something solid to hold on to. Last, I told them what my company actually sold for 9 years ago. It was a number I had never once said out loud in this house before, not to Bradley, not to Michelle, not to anyone but Carol and Gerald. $38 million. The number sat in the air a moment before anyone reacted, settling over the table like snow. Vanessa's mouth opened and nothing came out of it. "You were never going to manage a confused old man's checking account," I said. "You were positioning yourself to control an estate you never once bothered to ask me the actual size of." 3 sentences, total, across the whole reveal. I didn't raise my voice once, not for a moment, standing there with my late wife's letter still warm from my own hand. Here's where it actually landed. The power of attorney push is dead. Gerald confirmed, in writing, a week later, that any future attempt would face the notarized competency evaluation head-on. No attorney in the state would seriously touch a guardianship case against that kind of record. Vanessa's credibility with the entire extended family is, as of that dinner, gone. Frank hasn't spoken to her since. Eleanor called Michelle the next morning, mortified to have been unknowingly used as a witness to something she never understood the weight of. Michelle has made her own feelings plain, to Vanessa and to Bradley both, in no uncertain terms. Vanessa assumed she was positioning herself to eventually manage a modest retiree's accounts, some quiet inheritance she could gently steer. $38 million is what was actually sitting behind a 12-year-old truck and a man who did his own yard work every Saturday morning. That's the real gap between what she thought she was scheming for and what she actually put at risk trying to take it. It's a gap that cost her the family's trust entirely, regardless of what happens between her and Bradley going forward from here. Bradley called me 12 times in the 5 days after Christmas. I let most of them go to voicemail while I figured out what I actually wanted to say to my own son. I kept turning the locket over in my pocket, more than once, during those quiet, snow-heavy days alone in the house between the holidays. The phone buzzed on the counter each time, then went still again. On the 12th call, sitting at the kitchen table with the porch light on against the early dark, I finally answered. "I didn't know it had gone that far," Bradley said, his voice rough like he hadn't slept much in days. "The elder law thing. I swear to you, Dad, I didn't know about that part. I knew she was worried, or said she was, but not that, not the attorney, not the bank." "I believe you," I told him. "That doesn't mean there's nothing for you to think about." We had coffee 2 weeks later, just the two of us, at the same diner where I used to take him after Little League games. Same cracked vinyl booth we always sat in. Back when the biggest thing either of us worried about was whether he made varsity. Back before either of us knew what a thing like this could do to a family that thought it already knew each other, inside and out. He didn't defend Vanessa. He didn't ask me to forgive her either. He asked me, quietly, staring into his coffee, whether I thought people could actually change once you'd seen the worst version of what they were capable of. I told him, honestly, that I didn't know, that it wasn't a question I had a clean answer to. I told him Carol would have wanted him to ask that question a lot sooner than Christmas Eve. I told him I was glad, at least, that he was finally asking it now, even this late. A late question, I told him, was still better than a question never asked at all. Quiet isn't the same as unaware. It's just a choice about when to speak. I made that choice for 3 weeks, and I'd make it again. The people who plan to take something from you are always the first to call you confused. Carol knew that before I did, and she made sure I'd never have to prove her right alone. The locket still sits in my pocket most days. Carol was right about almost everything, right up until the end, and she was right about this too. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. I will see you on the next one.